Now, the Oxford style of debating, which we're engaging in here tonight, requires a resolution that is argued strongly by one side and strongly by the other. This is our resolution tonight. Follow Vienna, subsidize more housing. And because one of our debaters is from Vienna and she came the farthest, the Oxford rule requires that the debate be conducted in German. So you've all been carefully screened through the Eventbrite process and you all speak German. We're not going to have a problem, right? What? Forget that. It's actually, apparently it's going to be in English. So. But let me take a few minutes to bring you up to speed on the Oxford approach, on the Vienna approach, I should say, to housing that's going to be debated tonight. And I just want to be really clear that what we're debating tonight isn't, should we kick all the Viennese out of their subsidized housing or not? That is not a fair position to put the people who are arguing con into. What we're debating tonight is whether this model is appropriate for Vancouver. But let me just, I didn't want the debaters to have to spend a lot of their time explaining the Viennese approach, so I'm just going to take 5 minutes here and give you some basic facts about it. And basically I'm going to just plagiarize them shamelessly from the Tyee and also another publication called Edge, which is put out by the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the US, of all places. So the Austrian federal government offers 450 million euros a year, about $680 million Canadian, to subsidize housing in Vienna, with a population of about 2.6 million people. The city government contributes as well, bringing Vienna's total housing spending up to about 600 million euros a year. 60% of the city's population lives in city-built, owned, or managed housing. Vienna's city government owns and manages 220,000 housing units, which represent about 25% of the city's housing stock. These city-owned housing units, called social housing, are meant primarily for lower-income residents. The city also indirectly controls 200,000 units that are built and owned by limited-profit private developers, but developed through a city-regulated process. Vienna adopted the latter approach in the 1980s when it decided to collaborate with the private sector to build affordable housing rather than developing and owning more public housing. The city buys land deemed suitable for residential development and retains control over the type and nature of the development. The city then solicits proposals from various private developers which will build and retain ownership of the housing units. A jury evaluates these proposals based on 4 criteria: architectural quality, environmental performance, social sustainability, and economic parameters such as proposed rent levels and costs. And after the jury selects a developer, the city sells the land to the developer at an affordable price, just like we did with the Olympic Village. And everything just goes great, as we saw. In addition, the city gives the developer a loan with favorable terms, such as low interest rates and extended repayment periods. Private developers who collaborate with the city government to build affordable housing must allow the city to rent half of the new apartments to lower-income residents. The developer generally leases the remaining units to moderate-income residents. And in some projects, future tenants participate in the planning, design, and construction process, and they give input on what kind of facilities they would like to have in the building. Rents are regulated by the city government so that none of the residents pay any more than 20 to 25% of their household income for housing. A unique feature of Vienna's social housing program is that the city's income restrictions for subsidized units only apply when families first move in. Residents are never required to move out, even if household income levels increase in the following years. So this arrangement results in a substantial number of moderate income residents living in subsidized housing. Okay, so having waltzed through that, let's quickly review the debate rules. In just a few minutes, we're going to ask you to vote on tonight's resolution. That's right, you're going to vote before hearing the debate. and I will explain how to do that in a second. Then we're going to quickly tabulate the results and let you know the results. So we'll know we'll have a snapshot of where you stand now on this issue. It's important to know where you stand and to get an honest snapshot. You can game the system. We're on the honor code here. God will know if you do this inauthentically. And as Ian and Grace pointed out to me, if you want to game the system and actually win something, go to Vegas. You're not going to walk out of here with a pocket full of money. Anyway, after we know where people stand at the beginning of the debate, then the debaters are going to do their best to try and change your minds of those who disagree with them, and then you're going to vote again. And we'll see, we'll find out two things: where the room stands on the resolution, but also which debate team was more effective at changing people's minds. So we'll have both of those measures. And just really quickly, just to tell you how the evening's going to go, the debate teams are going to be invited down. They're each member is going to give a 7-minute argument. Then we're going to have an exchange period in the middle, and that's when you get to have at the debaters. And then we'll finish up. Each debater will give a 2-minute argument. Okay, so I can't tell if people look confused or not, but I'm going to forward John. I'm going to invite each of you to cast your vote now. Okay, I'm now ready to announce the pre-debate result. I don't have the sheer numbers here, but I do have percentages. There seems to be an original consensus in the room. On the pro side, yes, follow Vienna, subsidize more housing, 92.52%. And the guy that voted no is right over there. Con, do not follow Vienna. Do not subsidize more housing, 7.48%. So, that's why there's two ways to measure the outcome of this debate. Definitely we're interested in what the raw vote is in the room, but we're going to see if the con side can move that 7.48% a little bit more towards the 92.52%. So, without more ado, let's meet the teams that are going to duke it out. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight our city debaters. Arguing the pro side tonight. Yes, follow Vienna. We have the team of Thom Armstrong and Gabu Heindl. Come on down, Thom Armstrong and Gabu Heindl. Right here, join the 92% club. Good to see you.
See you, thank you.
And representing the 8%. Well, actually, first I'd like to introduce these two, and then we'll talk about the next two. Thom Armstrong, here to my immediate left, has more than 30 years leading Canada's cooperative housing movement in Saskatchewan, Ontario, and BC. And in Vancouver, he is Executive Director of the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC and 3 community land trusts. So, Thom, welcome.
Thank you.
His teammate, Gabu Heindl, is an architect, urban planner, theorist, and chairwoman of the Austrian Society for Architecture. She also teaches at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. So that is the pro team. And now, arguing against the resolution. No, do not follow Vienna. Thom, Davidoff, and Antonio Gomez-Palacio, come on down. Thom Davidoff is an associate professor at UBC Sauder School of Business. He has worked in real estate development in Brooklyn and California, and he has advised the White House on housing and mortgage policy. Thom, what did you advise the president about Russia as a potential partner in real estate ventures? Different president? Okay. All right. Antonio Gomez-Palacio is a founding partner of the Vancouver-based design group Dialogue, which is also, and he's also in Toronto as well. He's flown out here to join this debate. We thank him for that. He is regularly called upon to front a strategic conversation on how to city build through public and private initiatives. So that is our debate team arguing against the resolution. You can find extended biographies of all the debaters in your program, and so now on to the first segment of the debate. Each debater will now be given 7 minutes to make an opening statement, and we will start with Thom Armstrong.
So, Gabu, I don't like our chances of improving on 92%. We'll give it a shot.
We'll work on the 7.4.
That's right. So, follow Vienna, subsidize more housing. I wonder if we might agree to reconvene this debate in Vienna and continue the discussion there. But thanks for the invitation to be here. I work for the Co-op Housing Federation of BC, the voice of roughly 15,000 co-op homes in our province. And CHFBC is also a founding partner in Housing Central, which is a strategic alliance of the co-op and nonprofit housing sectors in BC. Now, I wanted to start with a quote from a philosopher who was born in Vienna, but I'm actually much more optimistic about how things are going to work out this evening than the professor. Vancouver is said to be one of the world's most livable cities, right? But is it really? I want to start by asking what makes a livable city, and I want to argue that. Let's face it, there's a ton of indexes that purport to rank cities on various criteria around livability. But I'd say a city is livable where people of all incomes and housing types can live, work, and play comfortably without undue hardship. That's my definition of a livable city. And for me, it's all about outcomes, right? If we don't agree on that, our policy prescriptions aren't going to count for very much. And the housing market has no housing policies. How could it? It's an abstraction. That's the job of people who are elected or hired to make our cities livable, perhaps to the dismay of many economists. And if that's the measure of a livable city, our current housing model is failing miserably. The number of unoccupied homes and the number of homeless rising. That's counterintuitive. We're experiencing an out-migration of people of working age, a desperate shortage of rental housing in a city where half of the households are renters and a quarter of them pay more than half of their income on rent. I want to argue that we are thoroughly confused about what housing is, or at least what housing is for. Housing used to be a home. Well, in Canada, we've always been a little bit mixed around it. Some people see it as their retirement security. But now it's more frequently an investment for restless capital. It's the object of speculation where exchange value is completely and utterly divorced from use value. And we're told that government should just get out of the way. If we can unfetter or unleash the market on this problem, it will provide what we need. The problems are all the ineffective and misguided housing policies introduced by governments who don't know what they're doing. And indeed, in that free market scenario, when we've unleashed the private market, sure, some people will scramble, and they will use their ingenuity to find a solution around the margins of that market. But many won't. And that's what you see in the report that was released by the BC Rental Housing Coalition just before the election. rising rates of homelessness, an affordability crisis, a supply backlog, and no reasonable prospect of catching up or keeping up. So the call to subsidize housing or subsidize more housing might lead you to think that not a lot of housing is being subsidized now. You'd be wrong. The question really is who's benefiting from the government's housing policies. And it's interesting, in the last 2.5 years, more households have been helped by CMHC mortgage insurance than were helped by the last 30 years of social housing programs before the feds got out of the social housing business in 1993. And when you combine the value of direct expenditures and tax expenditures, especially let's call it the sacred cow of Canadian housing policy, the tax exemption on capital gains arising from the sale of principal residences, the federal government spends 6 times the amount on homeowners than it spends on the average renter. So yes, subsidize more housing, of course, but subsidize it more effectively. Be smarter about it. That's why the BC Rental Housing Coalition advanced that 4-prong 10-year strategy just before the recent election. To expand housing supply, increase income support, target homelessness, and introduce innovation into our housing strategy. The price tag, I'll say, on that 10-year plan did shock some people. But the same people didn't appear to be too shocked by the cost of inaction on the housing crisis, which is considerably more. So the centerpiece of our call for innovation in the community housing sector is a pretty diverse set of stakeholders, ranging from co-ops and nonprofits to community land trusts to private developers with social mission arms and mission-based private equity funds and credit unions. Now, is this pie in the sky? Well, you know, a community land trust in London, the City of London, was recently in the news featuring a partnership with the city to build and operate housing for people with the price tied to the incomes of local workers. And our own community land trust is currently partnering with the City of Vancouver to build 358 new affordable homes on land leased from the city with results, with rents affordable to people at or below median incomes in the neighborhood. So yes, subsidize more housing, not the 1980s style capital grants or legacy subsidy streams that tie up governments and housing providers in decades-long funding agreements, but invest public equity in land, leverage private capital, and aggregate assets in the community housing sector to build and manage housing on a portfolio basis. And on that model, government's individual initial investment is going to be recycled over and over again. So yes, explore mixed tenure options from co-op to rental, and do it on a scale that actually puts a dent in the supply problem that we experience here. Create partnerships with the community land sector so that we can achieve the ideal of a livable city and create homes rather than tax shelters and investment havens for restless capital. So yes, let's follow Vienna and build more subsidized housing.
Thank you, Thom. Thom Davidoff will now argue against the resolution.
Okay, so no, we shouldn't subsidize more housing. So Vienna has the luxury of being, well, I haven't been there, I have printed a map, in something that looks somewhat like a featureless plain. So it's possible, there is the Danube, but, sorry, so there's the Danube, but there's a lot of land around the center where you can build, and if you did this at greater resolution, you'd see there's a lot of ag not too far away. So lots of land. I don't think housing's cheap there, but it's conceivable. Let's have a look at Vancouver. Really not very feasible, but land's going to be affordable to the government. We've got the ocean, we've got mountains, we've got Trump. So, land's going to be really, really expensive. So if you're going to create subsidized units, it's going to be a really big subsidy, right? To get to affordable for the lower 25% of the income distribution, versus what the market wants to pay for, these are all nice features too, right? So it's going to have to be very expensive. So then let's ask ourselves, do we really want to be in the business of what I like to call million-dollar lotteries, right? So suppose you had the following thought experiment. If you had $1 billion and you had one choice is give $1,000 each to 1 million families, okay? Or would you rather take the $1 billion and give $1 million to 1,000 families? Another way to say that is, suppose you had $1,000 entitlement, something like what the NDP proposed, for example, $400 a household that doesn't own. Okay, would it be appropriate to now force the lottery where you take away the entitlement, but you hold a lottery where 1,000 people get the $1 million prizes and everybody else just loses their $1,000 entitlement? I think most of us would say, well, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Why would we, force people to enter a lottery? Usually we think, a little bit of help to a lot of people is better than a lot of help to a little people. But now we're going to make the lottery worse, because most people with low incomes, if they got $1 million prize, they wouldn't spend it all on housing. They'd spend it on housing, food, car, what have you. Here, when you do social housing units, the prize has to be spent on the home, regardless of your preferences. So you can't use that very, very deep subsidy for things like food, clothes, books, care for your children, etc. We do have some subsidies, of course, as Thom mentioned. One of them is the BC Home Loan Program, which has the interesting idea of here's a supply curve, and that's, we know about Vancouver. A big problem is it's so hard to get units built because of the mountains and oceans, and regulations tend to be challenging. So no matter what happens to price, we're only going to build so many units, it looks like. So one thing you can do is tell people we'll give you extra money if you buy a house. So if you take demand curves, which we think usually slope down, the higher the price, the fewer people want to buy, and the lower the price, the more people want to buy. If you tell people, hey, we'll give you money if you buy a house, that shifts up demand. That makes people willing to pay more because they get a kickback when you give them a subsidy to buy. That, when you're not building more units, unfortunately doesn't really solve the problem. It just adds to price. But it does give us an idea of something we can do. Wait a second. If subsidizing something's a bad idea, taxing it is actually usually a good idea. Okay. So, first of all, another subsidy we ought to kill is single-family home subsidies. So we have a giant subsidy in Vancouver to homes like these. I was walking in the Arbutus neighborhood, which was maybe 6 blocks from my house, and maybe 10, I don't know. But I'd never gone there. I lived in Kitts, north of Broadway, and I never had a reason really to be south of, 16th on my way to get to the driver's license. Why had I never been there? Because there's nothing there. It's a bunch of single-family homes with no businesses. And, why is there nothing there? It's a single-family zone. The world's greatest real estate, but a single-family zone. That's a subsidy to rich people who can afford single-family homes. If we turn this into something, now if you really squint, you'll notice Vienna doesn't have a lot of single-family homes.
It's okay, we didn't subsidize their PowerPoint, so they gotta work with what they got. Okay.
So Vienna does have high property taxes of about 2%, I think. When you have high property taxes, it's not attractive to speculatively invest in real estate, right? You just don't do it. So what we ought to have is higher property taxes, maybe kill the sales tax, maybe have a lower income tax, a lump sum entitlement for people who have to struggle with high housing costs here, okay? It wouldn't damage the economy. It would, in fact, make the economy much more efficient. We'd have better jobs, better incomes, and we'd be a much more affordable place. Something some people say is housing should be a right, not a commodity. I think people do have a right to a roof over their head. Do they have a right to a house on Point Grey Road? No. So where is the line then between right and commodity? Do you have a right to a home in the West Side, in Vancouver, in Metro Vancouver, in Canada? How large of a home? Are we going to ban spending money on bigger homes? You know, I frankly don't think that's totally crazy. Maybe it's crass to want to spend your money on a fancy house. But consumerism is crass as a general matter, and there's not much to be done about it. This is the new Samsung, you may have seen the ads for the Samsung refrigerator that takes a cell phone picture of your fridge's contents. You know, I don't know that a free market is really good for anything, but if it is, it's to housing as well. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you just heard a Sauder Business School economist say he did not know if the free market was any good for anything. And that's why you come to these things, right? Okay. All right. So thanks, Thom. And now Gabu Heindl will now argue for the pro side.
So, yeah, thank you for having me here. And before the presentation is on, for me it's 5 o'clock in the morning. So either I'm really awake or I'm really tired. We'll see about that. But certainly we need to change that, and this is me changing it. Yeah, see, that's already the test. Okay. First test managed. Good. So I'm happy to protest. I've written down already many notes to fight you. But let's start with a serious short presentation. And David already gave some arguments. Well, Vienna is the #1 most livable place in the world due to Mercer. And I was told due to this study, Vancouver is #5. Not bad. And I guess other studies will say Vancouver is first and Vienna is fifth. I don't really care so much about such competitions, but I do find it interesting to ask myself, livable for whom? And I think livable for whom is one of the most important questions, affordable to whom, but also these places by exactly such competitions become very desirable for investments. And that goes for Vienna as for Vancouver. But still, I want to give you, let's say, some real serious numbers. In Vienna, you could live at a rent at a rate of €5 per square meters. I will give you translation soon. That would be, for instance, a normal, this is a house built before 1945, it's even privately owned. Yeah? It's rent controlled, if you get this contract now today, you wouldn't get it for €5 per square meters, but it just says that we have still partly, we do have very good rent control, which is one of the basic arguments aside from subsidizing. You will for sure not pay more than €7.50 if you're among the 60% of the population that are living in a council housing block, which we call Gemeindebau, or in a subsidized rental apartment built by a limited profit private developer or by community co-ops. And maybe that has to be said, the most of these developers that you mentioned are actually limited profit or non-profit. Actually, that would be €750 per square meter would equal 550 Canadian dollars for 100 square feet. That's reasonable. So that's cheap, right?
Cheap.
It's cheap. It's not reasonable. It's
1,000 square feet.
Okay, we'll do the calculations later. I calculated that if you pay 1,500 Canadian dollars for 500 square feet, does that make sense here? Then in Vienna, the equal would be 550 Canadian dollars. So we're a third of the price. Okay. So important to that is that this price is open to everybody, as has already been said, with an income not too low. And imagine the income maximum is 74,900 euros netto. That equals 113,000 Canadian dollars for a two-person household. With that money, you can get into a €750 per square meter house. And this is Red Vienna housing, but up to very kind of contemporary houses. Who are the lucky 60%? Well, the housing blocks are fairly mixed. We should maybe later on, there is some problems of discrimination. Also here, Vienna just changed the regulations that you have to be registered in Vienna for 5 years, not 2 years, to get actually listed higher up. That's maybe similar to USA First or so, a bit of a Viennese First, which we are very critical of, since of course apartments are not, subsidized housing is not really based on nationalism but on needs. Yet there's still a very mixed, as you can see here, it's just a list of people. What is interesting is that, as it has already been said, nobody has to ever leave. We see here a member of parliament who is also not leaving and who was critiqued for that by the yellow press. But it's a statement to say, okay, well, you're not supposed to really, you're not thrown out. So, how is that possible? 60% of the Viennese living in council or subsidized housing. It's possible by what was mentioned, 220,000 council housing, 200,000 subsidized apartments. What I really want to point out is that there's like 75% rental apartments, and I think that's really the total opposite to here. We believe in that renting is actually a retirement strategy and not owning. And that may sound very counterproductive or intuitive, but it's basically exactly the rent gap after 35 years, which makes renting very cheap afterwards, should be supposed to be, and it's a solidarity rent gap that is then put into more housing. Well, we'll talk about this later. Vienna's municipal housing is spread all over the city, even in the super posh city center. To understand this development, we have to go back where it all started. It's Red Vienna. What you see here is Karl Marxhof talking about a time when redistribution of wealth, social housing, and city infrastructure was really core to a social democratic city administration. And Vienna has been social democratic with some alliances until today. The Social Democrats of the time were very proud of their building activity, as this poster shows. It says, this is what I promised, this is what I built, and this is what I will build. So this is in the 30s. It goes without saying that we are not looking for this big man or macho gesture, but we are certainly looking for a clear political agenda, which is of course more self-critical and feminist. Switching very logically, right? Okay. Switching fast through more contemporary housing. This has become a blueprint for collective housing and self-organization and grassroots housing. You see how that looks like. It doesn't look like grassroots. So Vienna has been under pressure. It's building a lot. I have to be fast. Today, the private market is already like at 50 euro per square meter. So we have the subsidized market and the private market. Why is that? Because we run out of land, opposite to what you said. And so basically, big parks are also being attacked and housing are being built in there. Just let me show you that. This is in the center of in the center of the city. It says you don't have to live in these apartments to love Vienna. Owning them will do. So that's what the private market does to Vienna just as much. And I'm ending with this argument. This is what you see all around the city. It basically says that municipal housing was built in the year so and so by the means of a housing tax. And this housing tax was and is currently less, but still it's a progressive tax for redistribution, taxing the rich for building for the workers. And that's one of the bases that for not anymore the more workers today, of course, but for those who need it, and that would be like 60% or maybe even 100% of the Viennese.
And I have to stop you there.
Yes.
Okay.
And you can read all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonio Gomez-Palacios will now argue for the concept.
Wonderful. First, I'll start with a nod towards the folks in the white table, because I would vigorously agree with everything they have to say, and I think it's really important, all the work that they're doing, and I think it's key and very important. But I do want to position the conversation in the context of Vancouver, and the question being, should we be addressing subsidizing housing as a means to addressing housing affordability? And that's kind of really the nuts of it. And first and foremost, I want to pull it back into a conversation about the affordability of households, the living, the full spectrum of what it means to be living. And in many regards, you see that green part of the equation, that's transportation. So yes, we talk about a housing affordability crisis. I would also argue that we have a mobility affordability crisis. And it doesn't help if we're putting somebody in a subsidized housing that requires them to have 2 cars in the garage. We're putting everybody back in the same place. So we need to be understanding the full spectrum of people's life dependencies and where these things come into play. But just to start to spell it out a little bit. So 28% of people in Vancouver spend more than 30% of their income in housing. So that's a quarter of the population over a year. And we're also glad that Census Canada had its numbers just updated. But if you just look at renters, it's 44% of people in Vancouver who rent are spending more than 30% of their income in housing. So this is half of the population. Now again, just by Census Canada, 13% of the people are actually considered to be low income. So that's now coming back. The real question why we're all here is we're not supposed to be low income, and yet we're spending more than 30% of our income on housing. So there's a huge disconnect in this. So 13% is low income, 14% of people in Canada are actually in some version of subsidized housing. And of those, the percentage, 6% are being subsidized, and they're still paying more than 30% of their income on housing. So arguably, there's a huge issue on this side of the equation, right? And often it actually is not just housing, there's all kinds of other things going on that we need to be able to address and to address them comprehensively. And this is an argument of, no, don't stop spending on subsidized housing. But again, if we're going to be tackling the other side of the equation, right, the 44% and the big crisis of affordability, we need to be addressing it differently. We need to be thinking seriously around what are the different causes that are having a symptom around affordability. So we need to be thinking around that side of the piece, and this is where it gets a little bit more complex and more interesting for us to start to debate. Because arguably, subsidizing housing is not inherently equal to dealing with housing affordability. In fact, in many instances, and perversely, it ends up having counter effects. So think of one example, right? So we charge low property taxes to a bungalow out in the middle of nowhere, right? That has a huge cost to the municipality to service. And yet, that comes from a good place. Why? Because we're saying, hey, charge low property taxes to somebody who has a house that has a low value, presumably they're low income, therefore we should charge them less. So it comes from a good place. But perversely, it's subsidizing sprawl, it's subsidizing unsustainable ways of growing the city. And we're inherently encouraging the behavior that is not resulting in a sustainable city and affordable housing. This whole argument, if you have more than 7 minutes that I get to talk about, is very well kind of spelled out by Palin Blay on Perverse Cities, which is really kind of looking at all the perverse outcomes of the taxation system and how we start to really plan our cities. So what I'm going to argue is that inevitably there's a whole series of things that we can and should be doing, right? Subsidized housing is probably one of those, right? In the same way that we need to be building homeless shelters. But as we move down this list, they have an incremental cost to them. It's going to be always more effective if we can deal with things from a land use perspective, from a zoning, from catching these things way earlier. If we're only catching them at the point where we need to subsidize housing or do homeless shelters, it's because somehow we've missed the boat in the earlier places, in the places where we can get the much bigger bang for our buck. So yes, build affordable and subsidized housing, but ideally we're catching these things upstream. We're dealing with these things upstream, and we're building a better understanding of what are some of the root causes that are putting a stress on housing affordability. So yes, subsidized housing, but wouldn't it be great if we could be in a place where we didn't need to have to subsidize housing? Thank you.
And just to make it clear, you're arguing against if I had another $100 of government money to spend, you are arguing against subsidizing more housing, and you're saying spend it somewhere else.
Spend it upstream from.
Spend it somewhere
yeah.
else. Okay. Because you have to be against the resolution. I think we explained all that. Okay, good.
I got the black table.
Okay, so now we have 20 minutes for an exchange. Gabu said she was raring to fight, I think was the word she used. Thom, far be it for me to get in the middle of that. Go ahead, have at it.
Yeah, I can totally start. First of all, I heard about housing being a market, but not housing being a lottery, which is even worse, I have to say. And in this sense, I believe I would like to start counter-arguing your presentation. I totally am with you when it goes about higher property taxes. I believe that housing starts with land price and with land ownership. So first thing that is super important, and Vienna does not have. The problem is if you speak about a place you don't know, you knew that would come. Yeah? It's a kind of a bad argument. I'm aware of that. No, but there's mountains around. There is, and what is really nice, there's a green belt around, which the city of Vienna declared to be a green belt, which is of course in a way being targeted and also try to be built on, but at least the mountains is keeping Vienna from building to the rest. And most importantly, Vienna also, like every other city, of course, is slowly lacking public land. So one crucial issue for good subsidizing is actually accessibility to public lands. And certainly you would not then subsidize it for one family, single homes. Yeah? So I think this issue of mixing, making sure that within subsidizing you would also get into a certain density and really a smart urban design would counter, I think, both of your arguments. You have to say, okay, yes, you have to bring it to a higher scale. This is where it all starts. And then subsidizing, and that is very crucial, when we talk about subsidizing, it's not subsidizing people, it's subsidizing, it's what we call object subsidizing and not subject subsidizing. We do not want to give money to people in order to be then able to rent a more expensive house. Yeah? It's about supporting and subsidizing the structure where at the end people can freely choose, in the best case, where to live. And yes, I'm totally against the notion that somebody would have to logically, because the market says so, choose to be outside of Vancouver. There's a right to the city, and there's especially a right to the center of the city for everybody.
Thom or Antonio?
Right. So, so the right to the center of the city, I think, is a challenging one. We have a fair amount of immigration into Vancouver, and if you make it a right for anybody who wants to live in Vancouver to have a lovely apartment in Vancouver, there's going to be a lot of people lined up for the lovely apartments in Vancouver. And as we mentioned, the land's really expensive. We can create a lot of housing, and that will bring down prices, but the government just can't be in the business of, now you call it public land, but whether it's public or private, there's still a cost. Every time you don't sell land to the private sector, it's on a 1,000 square foot apartment, $500,000-$600,000 that you're giving away. And so be it city-owned land or privately owned that the city acquires, it's still the same cost, and it's just too big per unit.
We have to get land out of the free market. Yes. I think, and it can be done by land leasing, it can be done by, there's a lot of, and I'm sure that you would bring in good arguments, and if the public sells land, then it should be to bodies that are collectivizing land and not monopolizing land into private owners. And this is the starting point, and that does not mean, especially in times, I don't know about the situation here, but in Vienna, basically you don't make money by putting it into the bank. Yeah? You make money by putting it into, I don't know, into real estate or into land. So if you basically, if we take that out of the equation, we are, and this is why I ended with affordable housing is a political matter. Yeah, we can talk here long about technical issues and about, of course, numbers, how in the free market land is affordable to public or not. But there's something about free, like land is not a market thing. Yeah, land is not.
Is that the case in Vienna, that most of the land is out of the market? Or
Vienna is, like we have politicians who say that they're never that Marxist or communist as when it comes to land. That's not saying that basically it's such a good situation, but I would say that there has been quite a careful dealing with land. And when the city, when you mentioned the city selling land to developers, it's mostly and very carefully to developers, what we call gemeinnützige Genossenschaften. These are, well, how do we translate that now? It's co-ops, basically. It's non-profit co-ops or marginal profit co-ops, yeah, who have they are subsidized by the government in terms of tax reduction, yeah, but they are forced to not make profit out of their renting. So what I showed you in terms of the rent gap is saying, okay, the rent gap after they've built a house and after 35 years, they don't lower the rent, so you have a stabilized €7.50 rent, but the gap is used for building more and more social housing again. So basically, these co-ops are not allowed to make profit out of it.
Okay,
and these are the 200,000 units. Yeah?
Okay, so Antonio, you're in the business of helping people design housing and not going broke doing it. Is this a practical transference to the Vancouver setting, do you think? Or?
Well, obviously the Vienna model has some lessons learned where we can't export it directly, and it's not something that we can't learn anything from either. But I would argue that cities in many regards are a reflection of how we choose to relate to each other, right? So a city that is gated reflects the fact that we are scared of each other, right? If we're building walls. A city where we have homeless people on the street is a reflection of how we deal with these issues. So we need to get to a place where we're really talking about how do we come together as a society and figure out our collective needs and how do we address those in the broadest sense possible. And we in fact choose to subsidize an incredible amount of things. So we're subsidizing highways, we're subsidizing driving, we're subsidizing many other things. Just look at where the public budget gets spent. It's only until recently that we again have the federal housing strategy. So it's not a question of how much money we have to spend. The question is, where do we prioritize that money? And how do we direct it in a way that is going to create the long-term patterns that we want to do?
And your upstream argument is pretty good.
I said you have to disagree.
The problem is that we're not starting from scratch. Right? We have an 80,000 unit backlog in affordable rental homes. We have over 100,000 people in BC who can't afford the home they live in, and more than 7,000 people who are homeless. So we can't dial it back to zero, move upstream, and then implement that policy that you so nicely laid out. If we can work toward it, that's fine, but we have to do something dramatic in the interim to address the backlog and then create those conditions going forward so that your strategy could be implemented.
It's absolutely, it's like trying to deal with your health once you're ill, right? And you're showing up to the doctor and they're saying, we have to operate. I wish you had come here earlier, right? Yeah, absolutely. Right. So we're a little bit in that position where you have to take the medicine and start doing exercise and stop smoking, right?
So let's say there was this urgency, Thom, Davidoff. Is there enough public land? If there was an urgency to begin building on it right away, is there enough public land to really shift the equation here and form the basis for the kind of heavily subsidized nonprofit housing that Gabu was talking about?
Yeah, so I have not bothered to do that calculation of how many housing. Obviously, you could do more units with greater density. But again, whether it's private or public, it's the same cost. There's no free lunch in using public land, because when you fail to sell public land to private developers, that's a giant cost. There's a giant opportunity cost of that land. That's cash the government could have had, and that's cash the government could have spent on all kinds of benefits for people
I
who live
think
here.
the government should not make cash out of land. I think that's the biggest problem, the starting problem. You make cash by taxing, you make cash by making sure that that there's so much money out there, which you can, and that's why I showed this redistribution tax, yeah, that was progressively taxing the more wealthy and the more money you had that you didn't need. We can look into this look into this. It's called Breitnersteuer, Rotes Wien, Vienna Great. Yeah?
Did everybody get that?
Something to learn. I will write it down afterwards. But to make cash by selling land is the absolute wrong direction. Yeah, and that's keeping you off. You can not bring it upstream, nor downstream, nor anywhere. If you're, yeah. So I mean, this is the starting point.
So really, what hangs here is a political decision. The government would take that loss in order to create some stabilization, some measure of the public good that is not as easily measured with money.
No,
I guess.
It's not a loss. The opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is asking the private sector to do something that's not in its DNA, which is to accept land on terms that they may get a break on the price, maybe they don't, but on the promise of delivering downstream affordability that may materialize in the short term, but never endure for the long term. Whereas if you take land out of that market, create what one writer called speculation-free zones, invest that asset in the community housing sector, now you're not talking about an opportunity cost, you're talking about an investment that delivers return. You just have to be willing to measure the return in terms of social cohesion, in terms of affordability, in terms of mixed income communities, rather than on the pure cash value that you would assess it on if you were an investor in property, rather than creating sustainable communities and viable.
All right, and I'm gonna give Team Black a chance to respond to that, and then we're gonna go to the audience.
Okay. So just quickly on that, maybe not so quickly. So first of all, cash for governments isn't such a bad thing. After all, it's the cash from the cash for the government that you point out has funded your particular favorite way to spend money for the government.
I have many ways the government can spend money. Just talking about housing here, but
okay. So take an apartment that some guy would be willing to pay $1 million for, and you've decided, I really don't think that guy who's willing to spend $1 million is the right person to live in that apartment. I think somebody different who's only willing to pay $300,000 or able to pay $300,000 is the right person. So that's a $700,000 wedge, and that's money the government could obtain by selling to the market, $700,000. That difference in what two people are willing to pay is usually how we allocate. The person who's willing to pay more gets the thing, and the person who's willing to pay less gets something less. Now, we do that with just about everything. We do it with housing too. Now, so the question is, should there be luxury housing? Should there be luxury housing locations? And saying no, we want to totally abdicate the rights of the free market for housing. I mean, that's a very, very strong thing to do. And remember, one housing unit is still one housing unit. If you're kicking the guy who's willing to pay $1 million out, A, you're not getting this extra $700,000, and B, it's not like you're creating free units. It's still a housing unit. You're just deciding who you want to allocate it to.
the question is, who gets this 700 euros? You're talking in very abstract ways of $700. I'm sorry. Who are we talking here? We know that you're talking about the private market allocating $700 more. I couldn't care less.
Okay, very quick, and then to the audience.
Well, no, I was just, first, I like the notion of Team Black. Can we get t-shirts?
Yeah.
But I would nuance a little bit of trying not to use the terms subsidized and affordable interchangeably. Because I do think that they require different conversations, right? Subsidized is when we as a society have decided to invest into something in particular. Where affordable is getting to that healthy moment when people can actually afford their housing, right? And the subsidized is the medicine. And we need to be dealing with the medicine. But how do we get ourselves out of the requirement and the need to be figuring out how do we bring public monies, which we'll inevitably have to do to a certain extent, into an equation, and how do we get to a position where the land supply, the vacancy rates, where we can really start to get to a position where affordability is a healthy moment.
Okay, did anybody in the audience want to weigh in here?
I want to weigh in.
Okay, and do we have a microphone? We have wonderful volunteers with microphones, so maybe one could come here. Excellent. And if you could just keep it fairly short, because we only have about 15 minutes for this whole session.
To the question of affordability, it's great to have people who can afford $1.5 million, not $1 million, $1.5 million less than 1,000 square foot apartment in Vancouver. But when they want to get their dry cleaning done, their latte made, their pasta dinner, where are those people who are providing that service going to live?
Okay. So,
I think we all agree it would be nice if housing was more affordable. I think the question is just how are we going to get there? And I think the money isn't there to get to affordability with subsidizing units.
so without subsidizing, what mechanisms would you suggest that would ensure that people who are providing the roles that our audience members.
So let's reemphasize. Okay, so number one, I think most of the land, and the city's doing nice things. There's now laneways, but a lot of the land is zoned for single family. That's a gift to people who want to come and buy a single family home, which is unaffordable to almost anybody in Vancouver. That's a gift, so let's just get rid of the gift. Let's allow condos and townhomes.
Let's talk about the RS1 zone.
Exactly. Totally agree. So,
seriously.
Yeah. So that's subsidized housing for rich people.
I couldn't agree more. I think I guess that's something that has not been played against each other. So, but it's another measure that should be implemented.
And let me applaud Vienna also.
Just stop, you two. You're supposed to be disagreeing. It's a debate.
Number two is the taxation. I mean, when I got to Canada for the first time and opened my property tax bill, I thought it was for a month. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Then I opened my income tax bill and I was like, now I get it. Then that's exactly wrong for Vancouver, because if you don't allow us to build, if you're forbidden from building, essentially, okay, a property tax doesn't do any damage. It doesn't hurt anything in the economy. It doesn't change anything. So it's practically free money. So let's cut income taxes, cut sales taxes. It would take leadership from the province, but make this like a special economic zone of low taxes, but have higher property taxes. That would get rid of speculative investment, and it would make a better economy, and the pasta cookers would hopefully have a shot at affording the housing within shouting distance.
All right. Somebody really disagreeable, please.
There's a brave 8% somewhere in there.
There we go, right here.
7.5.
Can you get it all the way through there? Okay,
It's
great.
increasing.
Now you have the microphone. We have no way to tear it away from you, so you have to be responsible and not be crazy. Okay, go ahead. Okay.
The kind of question I have is,
Is there a button?
was it on?
Yeah.
I'll just yell.
Okay.
Anyways, so my question is something about what the city ends up looking like. Because what we have is David, you said we have this beautiful place with mountains and oceans and whatever is going on. And then what we do is we build more units, right? So we sell it, build more units. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee any kind of affordability, because what we see is you take a house, sell it for $2 million, somebody comes in, makes a duplex, they sell each duplex for $2 million.
Yeah.
Or you do this, it doesn't actually in any way do that. But at the end of the day, what happens is what kind of society do we live in? Because all the people living here, are the people that can only afford to live here. We have no social diversity. So I think we need to have both sides, but your side kind of eliminates their side, and their side needs you to help them fund them.
So what is your question? Or your...
At the end of the day, what does it all
For
look
these
like?
guys on this side, the 7%.
Okay, if we don't subsidize, where do we end up? And,
Yeah, where do we end up?
doesn't that give us
We just end up with like a lot of really rich people living here.
Got it.
We don't have a diverse society, and we need diversity. To have
Did everybody hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the good news story is that we've spent the last 50, 80 years on a path where the pendulum has taken us into single use, low densities, car dependency, right? And a type of city that we actually no longer dream about, right? That single two-car garage out in the middle of the burbs, which used to be the dream for a generation, that's no longer it, right? The good news is that the aspiration is now walkable, right? It's an environment where I can achieve all the activities of my day-to-day life within walking distance, right? Where I don't need to buy a car in order to be able to get to work, right? Or take my kid to daycare. Where I don't have to have my single private backyard, but I'm happy to share in a public park, right? The good news is that the tendency is now for essentially more affordable cities, more sustainable neighborhoods. And density, which is an evil word in many contexts, is actually a big part of having that conversation. And density is not a silver bullet either, but the question is, what is the critical mass of population, the critical mass of uses and users that we need in order to deliver the sustainable lifestyle that we're trying to achieve? And the more that we actually can have some of those complex conversations, then we can have the cities where diversity, where inclusivity, where affordability can be part of the equation. And yes, it's not going to be a silver bullet, you change zoning and then you're done, and then all of a sudden it kind of works like magic by next year. It's complicated.
Okay.
You have to do a number of different things.
I think Gabu wants to say it.
Do I look like this? Yeah. Again, I need to counter, but I couldn't agree more. But we need to find ways. I think government here also needs to find ways how to actually intervene in the free market, because he's saying all these nice things, and we know that the free market is not doing it without some nice little pressure. Huh? And that, I think, can be done by a number of ways. The subsidizing model of Vienna is, of course, also one to keep, in a big scale, to keep the rent prices down, because once you have a large municipal market, like a provision, you're taking you're taking some of the stress out of the private market. But then there's also we are discussing, and I'm sure it's been discussed here a lot as well, like how do you actually pressure or like put government quality control into developments whenever you're dealing with upzoning, whenever you're going denser, etc. Yeah? How do you share or basically share the costs for infrastructure? Yeah? There's no, certainly. And
it's way more efficient to do it at that point. It's going to be much better bang for your buck if you do it at that point than if you're having to do it way downstream.
No, and I believe it's the combination. It must be the combination, because you need infrastructural share, like you need the share of costs of infrastructure, etc. But you need the government subsidies, and maybe subsidizing again and affordable housing is two different things. And in fact, the municipal housing, of course, is even stronger, because that keeps it completely out of subsidizing. It's a self-subsidizing in terms of building yourself. But I believe that's really far away from Vancouver, or I don't know. But I think why we are on the pro team is to support co-op housing and to really look whether it's financially by giving money or by giving cheaper land or by supporting then that actually would build a huge body of alternatives to the free market. And
I'll give you the counter.
The diabolical approach that the no team is taking is to make our argument for us in the hope that we'll attract more votes at the end of the evening to their side.
So I'll give you an example, right? In order to make mobility affordable, what we've been doing for the last 50 years is subsidize cars, right? By
Why do you do that?
keeping gas exactly, right? Where what we need and we're increasingly starting to do is to subsidize transit. So you still need to decide where are we going to be investing our public
And
wherewithal.
how do you subsidize transit? You need money, maybe by taxing private transportation or to making it more expensive.
Absolutely. So what I'm suggesting is we need to collect those public resources. That's what government's for. That's why we organize ourselves with a public sector. But start to invest that money wisely and put it in the infrastructure that is going to create the affordability and not create the dependency.
Okay, now Gabu, listen. I'm going to ask an audience member, and then you can take whatever you were about to say and kind of glom it onto your answer to and then that way we get other people involved. Yeah, right there, I think. Yeah.
You like our evil genius, huh?
That's brilliant.
Right there. Yeah.
No microphone.
Hi there. I think actually both sides, whether you're talking subsidy or you talk on the pro side or you're talking taxation changes, are both great ideas. Both require political will to make those changes, and I think we've got very resistant political will at the civic level and the provincial level. So I was going to ask in Austria, and I was trying to research it really quickly on my phone, but it seems that there's pretty tight restriction on political donations, and here we have no restrictions. So what do you think is the impact on that and political will to make the change?
Well, I think you answered that by your question. Yes, I think there should be restrictions, and they're certainly tighter in Austria than what I hear in the news from the US and Canada. But of course, there's also lobbies by the industry and by the market also in Austria, in Vienna, and actually at this moment. There is some pressure on exactly that minimal profit developers or associations, where there's ideas that their profit should actually be doubled, their profit margin also, and luckily there's a civil body, there's people and experts and so on who form together and are opposing such ideas. Yeah? To actually open that also to the market. So in the sense, maybe it's a European understanding of politics, but politics are in the best case weak. So like to put pressure on the politicians is maybe more difficult if the lobbies of those donating are much stronger. But I cannot help you with that.
Now, Thom, you've not
difficult task.
Thom, you've not only advised the White House, but I think you've advised. David Eby, who's the NDP MLA from Point Grey, and also the Premier, leader of the BC Liberals. So you probably know a little bit about political will out there. What do you think about this question?
Most importantly, I work for a real estate developer in Brooklyn, so I'm very familiar with political contributions. But we tried to do tax reform to get to more affordability, and what we wound up with was a foreign buyer tax. And something I want to point out is, no matter what, if it's a fixed number of housing units at a subsidy, you're going to run into an immigration problem. Because people are going to, if you're charging less than the market will pay for housing units, what that means by definition is more people will want to be here than can be here. And when people feel like their ability to have a house is threatened, they get upset, and I think the tenor of conversation towards immigration has maybe been less positive in the last couple of years than one would like. And exactly how you're going to politically, and it's apparently a political market, this subsidized housing market, how the politicians should be deciding who's entitled to live in Vancouver and who isn't, I think would ultimately become a bit of a problem.
Well, this is your lottery argument, though, and you know, I like the lottery metaphor. I've seen it before, but the problem I have with it is that it assumes a poverty in supply, and we're not at a static point. We can't afford to remain at the static point we're in now with the huge backlog in affordable homes and no capacity to produce those 7,000 rental homes that we need every year just to keep up with demand after we cure the backlog. So yes, it would turn into a lottery if we weren't able to address the supply issue adequately. But if we do start to create those partnerships between government and the private sector and the community housing sector and make a significant dent in supply, then the pressure comes off that lottery. I think it's worth distinguishing here in some of our conversations between the private market and the private sector. There's no animosity between the private sector and the co-op and nonprofit housing sector. Every stick of housing in Canada in the co-op and nonprofit sectors has been designed by private sector architects, engineered by private sector engineers, built by private sector contractors. The thing and that's a very productive partnership. What we're not willing to support, particularly in the context that we operate now, is speculation on land that drives affordability out of the reach of what you have both referred to, I think, as a healthy mix in the population.
Okay, and I'm gonna, I'm really sorry to say this. I'm gonna have to stop this part of the evening, this exchange portion now. I've already gone 10 minutes longer than we normally would because it's just been so fascinating, and the questions were great, debaters were great. But now we need to move to the 2-minute summaries, and the first person up is Thom Armstrong.
Again? So, 2 minutes. Our proposition is follow Vienna, subsidize
The microphone there.
more housing. So that doesn't mean subsidize housing exactly as Vienna does. We have a different history, different culture, and we operate at a different scale, after all. But we do have to invest more government resources smartly in a broader range of affordable housing options for our citizens. If we fail to do that, we can count on only one thing, and that's watching the existing crisis get worse, and a lot worse. And our affordable housing strategy can't be just drive east until you can afford something. taking care to, for sure, skip Burnaby on the way there. So the solution lies in the active engagement of all three levels of government in partnership with the community housing sector. If we create speculation-free zones in land through a community land trust vehicle, tap into existing housing assets, private equity, government investments, we can eliminate the supply deficit, close the affordability gap, and reduce or eliminate homelessness. And you're right, whoever asked the question, it's going to take political will at all three levels of government, a commitment to exploring new housing models, and a spirit of partnership that, let's face it, has been all too rare on the housing scene. So it's time to create affordable homes for people who live and work in our city and our region, not tax shelters or impossibly high rates of return for that restless capital. And voters and taxpayers will support this approach if it delivers more livable and sustainable cities. The longer we wait, the more desperate the situation will become and the more expensive it will be to fix it. It's just that simple. Thank you.
All right. Tom Davidoff, it is your turn.
So a housing affordability problem, which we certainly have, is a problem of too many people want too few housing units. Too many people want the units. If it's for speculative investment, that's easy. Raise property taxes, use the money to strengthen the economy in other ways. If the problem is too few units, that's easy. Relax zoning, get more housing units. Spending a fortune in government money to transfer housing units from one set of users to another doesn't solve either the poverty problem.
It is the dark side.
Thank you.
I'm giving you 20 extra seconds because you're in the dark. Yeah.
having the political process decide who gets the units doesn't solve the problem of not enough units, and it certainly doesn't solve the poverty problem because it costs too much money.
Okay. I have to say, you made me see the light at the end there. Okay. Gabu, Heindl, it's your turn.
I would like to start with one important thing. Regulation and subsidizing is only a tool for empowerment of people independent of their wealth. It's nothing else. It's empowerment, and that should be the first thing. And it's based on notions of solidarity, justice, and it's for sure needs a change in politics. And I can only, empower you or empower ourselves to say, okay, that needs to be done together. What's the advantages of Vienna's housing policy is that the active housing policies and subsidies supported by a land advisory board and developers competition is to define and establish quality specifications, to influence the real estate market in the sense that the more housing is provided logically in a cheap way, it keeps the rents down. It's a promotion of construction industry and securing of jobs on the public side, and it is logically understanding housing as a public good, housing as a human right. And we've talked already about that. It's about, yes, taxing land, making sure, being careful with land, stopping one-family houses, absolutely. On my website, I'm a private sector architect. I say I do not build one-family houses. So nobody comes to have it built by me, because logically, but I don't want to speak against it and build it myself. No sellout of public land or buildings to private market, securing urban land outside of the free market, no privatization of public goods, and subsidize objects, not subjects, collectivize rental houses rather than private ownership. How you get there, it's difficult. Vienna and Vancouver are very different places, but I think there's a lot to be learned, and it will always be a mix of things. It will not just be subsidizing housing. It will also be rental control, etc., etc. But it needs a change of thinking and a change of politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Antonio Gomez-Palacios.
So if the last 6 months have taught us something, is if you don't find sympathy with your friends in the counter table, you go up to Twitter and try and find it. So I went in and asked the question: should we be subsidizing subsidizing housing? And it wasn't at that time 92%; it was 91%. So people are getting more radical as they're coming into this room. But that was what I got back on Twitter. But then I asked the question: if the subsidizing housing actually increases housing affordability? And clearly the conversation is more complex, right? Clearly there's something going on, and I think that we acknowledge that. And if we're going to get to the position where we do address affordability more comprehensively, then we can't be dealing just with the symptoms. We need to be dealing with the causes. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, I do now have the results. Please return to your tables, because in the past we found that when the results are announced, people aren't friendly anymore and they start to throw water bottles at each other and stuff. So. All right, so I'm just going to remind you that at the beginning it was 92% pro, 92.5% pro, and 7.5% con. The vote this time around was 80.81% pro and 19.39% con, so con won by 11.71%. I still want to remind you that 81% of people are ready to go out and pull land out of the private market and build subsidized housing on it. So that's something to be raised with our political leaders as they huddle right now, trying to be so cooperative and groundbreaking. And I just want to thank the debaters for a fantastic job tonight. That was just amazing.